The morning sun filtered through the wide glass panels of the international airport, casting golden beams across the bustling terminal. Passengers wheeled their suitcases across glossy floors, their chatter blending with the gentle announcements echoing from overhead speakers. Gate 42B was especially crowded, with people lining up to board Flight 771 to New York. In the sea of travelers, a boy sat alone near the window, calm, quiet, and unnoticed by most. 16-year-old Malik Weston adjusted the strap of his backpack as he scrolled through photos on his phone. He wasn't dressed like someone who turned heads. His hoodie was clean but plain, his jeans faded from too many washes, and his sneakers well-worn but carefully tied. Yet behind his deep brown eyes was a poise not commonly found in teenage boys. There was something grounded in the way he sat, unshaken, as though he'd already lived through storms most people never imagined. Malik wasn't nervous about flying. He had been on planes more times than he could count. What unsettled him was the reason behind this trip. It was the first time he would be traveling alone to visit his mother's grave since she passed away 2 years ago. He had kept his emotions buried deep, out of sight even from his closest friends. This flight wasn't about comfort, it was about closure. Flight 771 to New York now boarding, the speaker announced. Malik stood, grabbed his small carry-on, and joined the line. Near the front of the plane, a tall woman in her late 50s checked boarding passes with a mechanical smile. Her name tag read Marjorie, and beneath it, a silver pin marked 25 years of flight service. Though she wore the crisp uniform of a senior flight attendant, there was a tightness in her jaw and a sharpness in her eyes that gave away her irritation. She had been up since 3 a.m., and a late crew member had delayed the flight's prep time. She didn't have the patience today, not for delays, not for passengers who didn't listen, and certainly not for teenage boys with attitudes. As Malik stepped forward and showed his boarding pass, she gave him a fleeting glance before forcing a thin smile. "Row 18, left side," she said curtly. He nodded politely and walked down the narrow aisle. Though she didn't say it aloud, she watched him with suspicion. It wasn't anything he did, at least not yet, but there was something about young men traveling alone that always made her wary, especially when they looked like they didn't belong in Economy Plus. Malik reached his seat and stowed his bag. As he sat by the window, a small child in the next row giggled while her mother adjusted her seatbelt. The cabin was peaceful. A few business travelers opened laptops. Some older passengers reclined to nap. The scent of coffee and jet fuel lingered faintly in the air. For a while, everything was normal. But peace doesn't always last. An hour into the flight, after the seatbelt lights dimmed and the plane cruised above the clouds, Marjorie rolled the beverage cart down the aisle. Her eyes skimmed the rows as she asked, "Drinks? Water? Soda? Juice?" When she stopped near Malik, he lifted his head politely. "Could I have sparkling water, please?" Her hand hesitated. She looked him over again, then spoke with an edge in her voice. "We only serve that in first class." "Oh," Malik said, his tone calm. "I thought it was included in Economy Plus. That's what my dad usually books." Marjorie's lips thinned. "And who's your father?" "Some celebrity," she asked with an exaggerated smirk. It was meant to be a joke, but it didn't sound like one. Malik shook his head, slightly uncomfortable. "No, ma'am. He runs a few businesses. He travels a lot." "Mum," she said with a patronizing hum. She handed him a regular water without another word, and moved on. To the passengers nearby, the interaction was brief, harmless even. But Malik felt the shift, the scrutiny, the judgment. It wasn't the first time. As the flight went on, Malik reclined and tried to rest, earbuds in, eyes closed. He barely noticed the growing whisper between two flight attendants near the galley. Marjorie was whispering to a younger colleague, gesturing toward Malik's row. Her voice was low, but her words were edged with assumption. "He says his father runs businesses," she scoffed. "I've seen this before. They buy the cheapest tickets and think they're entitled to everything." The other attendant, A blonde woman named Tessa looked unsure. But he hasn't done anything. Marjorie shrugged. Let's see how entitled he feels when he's moved. Later in the flight, Malik opened his backpack and pulled out a protein bar. He had a peanut allergy, so he always carried his own snacks. He was careful, respectful. He even checked the packaging again, just to be sure. As he opened it, Marjorie suddenly appeared beside him like a hawk. "Sir, what is that?" Malik looked up. "Just a protein bar, Mom. We don't allow outside food on board. I have a peanut allergy. It's the only thing I can eat safely." "Peanut allergy," she echoed, eyes narrowing. "Do you have documentation?" I don't carry a doctor's note with me," he said, taken aback. "But it's on my medical records in the airline profile. I fly often." "That's what they all say," Marjorie muttered. "You think you can make up rules just because your daddy booked a ticket." Before Malik could reply, she snatched the bar from his hand. Passengers nearby turned to look, startled. "Hey, that's mine," Malik said, surprised but still composed. "Watch your tone," she snapped. "I don't know who you think you are, but—" A man in row 19 stood. "Miss, he didn't do anything wrong." She turned toward the man with a glare. "Sir, please return to your seat." Malik's voice was steady but firm. "I didn't break any rules. I just want to eat safely. That's all." But Marjorie's temper had already boiled over. With a sudden move, she slapped Malik's phone off the tray table. It hit the aisle and skidded under a seat. The cabin went silent. Passengers gasped. One woman covered her mouth. A child started crying. Tessa rushed forward, whispering urgently, "Marjorie, what are you doing?" Marjorie stood over Malik, breathing heavily. "Let that be a lesson. You don't lie on my flight." Malik, stunned, looked around. A few people had their phones out. He remained in his seat, composed, his voice shaking slightly but not from fear, from disbelief. "I didn't lie," he said quietly. "And I didn't deserve that." From first class, someone stood up. Slowly, purposefully. A tall man in a charcoal hoodie and designer sneakers began making his way down the aisle. He didn't look angry. He looked calm, dangerous, even in his silence. The kind of calm that meant something big was coming. He passed the curtains that separated first class from the rest of the plane and walked toward Malik. Passengers moved aside. The silence was deafening. Marjorie turned around. "Sir, please return to." The man didn't even glance at her. He knelt beside Malik and picked up the phone, checking it over, then handing it back. "Are you okay, son?" he asked. Malik nodded, his voice cracking. "Yeah, I'm fine." The man turned to Marjorie. "You just laid your hand on my son." Marjorie blinked. I didn't know he was your—" "No," the man interrupted. "You didn't know who I was. But that shouldn't have mattered, because no child deserves to be treated like that." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, opening it just enough to flash a card that made Marjorie's face drain of color. He was the CEO of the airline. And now, everyone was watching. For several long seconds, the silence in the cabin clung to every passenger like thick fog. Marjorie stood frozen, her jaw slightly ajar, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. She looked between the boy and the man who now stood calmly beside him, trying to grasp the gravity of what had just unfolded. The man, Ezekiel Weston, didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The quiet steel in his tone was enough to chill the air around them. "I watched everything from first class," he said evenly. "The way you looked at him, the way you questioned him, the way you grabbed his food and slapped his phone." His voice never rose, but every word struck like thunder. "You didn't see a passenger. You saw a problem. A disruption. Something to control." Marjorie's eyes welled up, not with regret, but fear. Her mouth opened, a trembling excuse at the edge of her lips. I didn't know that he was my son." Ezekiel cut in, raising an eyebrow. "Why should that matter? What if he wasn't? What if he really was just a kid traveling alone? Marjorie tried again, more desperately this time. Sir, I didn't mean to offend anyone. I just thought. That's exactly the problem, Ezekiel said quietly. You thought. The pilot emerged from the cockpit, alerted by the murmuring chaos. Is everything okay here? He asked, eyes darting between Ezekiel and Marjorie, sensing something more serious than just spilled water or a passenger complaint. Ezekiel turned toward him, calm and composed. Captain, I'm Ezekiel Weston, founder and CEO of Skybridge Airlines. The pilot's demeanor changed instantly. Sir, of course, I had no idea you were on board. I didn't announce myself because I wanted to fly like everyone else. I wanted to see how my company treats the people who trust us. He paused. Now I know. The pilot looked toward Marjorie, who was visibly shaking. I'll escort her to the rear of the plane, he said quickly. Ezekiel nodded. And I want her off this aircraft as soon as we land. I'll handle the rest. Marjorie stumbled back, her once authoritative stride now reduced to meek, hesitant steps. The murmur of passengers grew louder as she disappeared toward the galley. Tessa, the younger attendant, came forward and crouched beside Malik, eyes full of worry. I am so sorry, she said. None of that should have happened. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't stop it. That's on me too. Malik looked at her, the maturity in his gaze far beyond his years. Thank you for saying that. Ezekiel helped his son adjust his seat and sat beside him for the remainder of the flight. No one else dared to disturb them. And yet, it wasn't about power anymore. It was about principle. Ezekiel wasn't just a CEO with billions in assets. He was a father who had once been that boy, young, black, and too often underestimated. He had built Skybridge Airlines from the ground up. He had made it his mission to create an inclusive culture, not one that echoed the prejudices he had faced growing up. But this flight reminded him, culture couldn't be claimed by vision statements or slogans. It had to live in the smallest actions, even 30,000 feet in the air. When the plane landed, the gate was swarmed not by press, but by internal Skybridge officials who had been alerted mid-flight. Marjorie was taken aside for an immediate suspension pending investigation. Her last words before exiting were not of apology, but of shock. I thought he was just another. She didn't finish. Later that day, Ezekiel and Malik walked through JFK's private terminal, where a car was waiting. The sunlight reflected off the black sedan as they approached. I didn't want to call you, Malik said, his voice low. I didn't want to bother you during your meeting. Ezekiel opened the door for his son and paused. Malik, I don't ever want you to think protecting your dignity is a bother. Malik slid in and looked out the window. I could have handled it. I've dealt with worse. I know you have, Ezekiel said as he joined him in the back seat. And that's what breaks my heart. As the car pulled onto the freeway, Malik's phone buzzed with notifications. Videos of the incident had gone viral. Hashtags were already trending. Hashtag CEO on board and hashtag boy on flight 771 were making rounds. A few passengers had recorded everything and uploaded it without realizing who the man was. Now the world knew. But Malik wasn't comforted by the attention. If anything, it made him uncomfortable. I don't want this to be about me, he murmured. I don't want to be a moment that passes. I want it to mean something. Ezekiel looked at him, a mix of pride and sorrow in his expression. Then let's make sure it does. The next day, Skybridge Airlines released a public statement not just about the incident, but about the steps they would be taking. Ezekiel himself stood in front of cameras and owned what had happened, not hiding behind a PR team. What happened on Flight 771 wasn't just an incident. It was a reflection of a much deeper issue in our society, he said. One that creeps into institutions, even those built with the best intentions. We can't claim excellence while allowing discrimination to take root on our flights. My son wasn't just a passenger. He was a mirror, a reminder of who we serve and what we must protect. He didn't name Marjorie. He didn't need to. Instead, he announced the formation of a new initiative, the Weston Wings Program, a nationwide campaign to promote empathy, accountability, and anti-bias training for every staff member in the airline. Not a one-time seminar, but a continuous education model that would also be made public so other companies could adopt it. He finished his speech with a line that silenced even the harshest critics. Respect isn't earned by status. It's granted by humanity. Malik watched the speech on his phone from his room, his heart quietly swelling. He didn't want to be famous. He didn't want revenge. He just wanted the world to be a little less cruel to kids who looked like him. And maybe, just maybe, that flight was more than turbulence and tears. It was a turning point. 2 weeks had passed since the flight. For most people, it would have faded into memory. Another news headline swept under the tide of the next trending outrage. But not for Malik, and certainly not for Ezekiel. Malik had returned to school, trying to pick up where he left off, but everything had changed. His classmates looked at him differently now, not with mockery or judgment like before, but with curiosity, respect, sometimes even awe. Some whispered his name in hallways. A few approached him just to say they saw the video and thought he was brave. But Malik didn't feel brave. He still thought about the slap, about how quick it happened, how helpless he had felt in that moment, how silent the other passengers had been until it was too late. Worse, he kept replaying the look in Marjorie's eyes, the disgust, the disbelief that someone like him could be in a seat she didn't think he deserved. That wasn't something a viral video could erase. One afternoon, as Malik sat quietly in the school library, flipping pages of a history book he wasn't really reading, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Hey, Malik." He looked up. It was Amara, a girl from his history class. She was quiet, like him, sharp eyes, always reading, always listening. He hadn't expected her to talk to him, let alone seek him out. "Hi," he said cautiously. She sat down across from him, backpack still slung over one shoulder. "I watched what happened on the flight. I saw the full video." Malik tensed. "Yeah, I've been trying to forget it." "You shouldn't," she said gently. "You didn't do anything wrong." He nodded slowly, fingers curling around the edge of the book. "Doesn't stop people from thinking I did. Some people still say I overreacted. That maybe she was just doing her job." Amara raised an eyebrow. "Slapping a kid and mocking him is not doing your job." "I know," he said, "but you know how people are. I'm just a kid to them. A black kid." Amara's expression softened. "My dad's from Ghana. I've seen what people say about him too. He's a professor, but every time we go to the airport, someone treats him like he's suspicious, like he doesn't belong." They sat in silence for a moment. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out a flyer. "What's this?" Malik asked. "It's for a student leadership forum next month," she said. "It's called Voices at the Table. They're looking for young people to talk about racial bias and equity in schools, public spaces, even on planes." Malik stared at the flyer, then back at her. "You want me to go?" "I think you should speak," she said. "Not as the kid from the plane, but as you. You have something to say, and people are listening now." He hesitated. The thought of standing in front of strangers, talking about something so raw, so personal, it made his stomach twist. But something in Amara's eyes, hopeful, firm, planted a seed of courage he hadn't felt in weeks. "I'll think about it," he said. Meanwhile, back at Skybridge Airlines headquarters, things weren't quiet either. Ezekiel had launched the Weston Wings program with full force, pouring millions into training, evaluation, and team restructuring. But he also knew this wasn't a problem money alone could fix. So he began showing up unannounced at airports, talking to flight attendants, gate agents, even janitors. He asked them how they felt, what they'd seen, what they were afraid to say. Some were honest, some weren't, but a pattern emerged. There were good people who had become numb, others who were too scared to speak up, and some, like Marjorie, who had quietly nurtured their biases for years, unchecked, unchallenged. One late evening, Ezekiel sat in his office, staring at an email from Marjorie's lawyer. She wanted to sue for wrongful termination, claiming she was set up, humiliated, and fired for a mistake. He didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, he called his chief of HR. "Make sure the staff hears from me directly next week," he said. "I want to speak to every employee, not just the execs." "You want to address all 22,000? The HR lead asked, startled. "Yes," Ezekiel said, "even if it takes months, one team at a time." When the call ended, he sat back, rubbed his tired eyes, and looked at a photo of Malik on his desk, smiling. 5 years old, holding a model plane Ezekiel had given him. It reminded him why he built this company in the first place. Not to be rich, but to build a world where that smile would never be stolen by the ignorance of someone in uniform. 2 days later, Malik stood nervously at the microphone inside the community center auditorium. The Student Leadership Forum was packed. Teachers, local leaders, activists, and students filled every row. His palms were sweaty. His voice trembled at first. But as he started to speak, the trembling faded. "I didn't ask to go viral. I didn't ask for that flight to become a news story," he said, his voice clearer now. "All I did was exist, sit in my seat, be polite. And I was punished for it." He looked around the room, and something shifted. "But I realized something. That day wasn't just about me. It was about every kid who's been judged before they speak, labeled before they move, mistrusted before they've even been seen." He paused, the crowd hanging on every word. "So if you ask me what I want now, it's not revenge. It's not money. I just want us to stop pretending we don't see what's happening. I want people to stop saying, 'That's just how it is,' because it doesn't have to be." There was a long silence. Then the room erupted in applause. In the back row, Amara smiled. Malik stepped off the stage, feeling something he hadn't felt since before that flight. Peace. He didn't know what would come next, but he finally knew who he was becoming. The days after the forum unfolded in ways Malik never could have expected. His speech had been shared not just by local groups, but by national outlets, youth organizations, and influencers who resonated with his words. He wasn't just the kid from the plane anymore. He was a voice. Ezekiel watched it all from his office with a complicated mix of pride and pain. As a father, he wanted nothing more than to shield his son from the ugliness of the world. But as a businessman, and more importantly, a black man who had climbed his way to the top through storms of judgment and isolation, he knew shielding Malik was no longer the point. Malik didn't need protecting anymore. He needed purpose. And now, the world had handed him one. One morning, over breakfast at their kitchen table, Ezekiel slid an envelope across to Malik. It had no name on it, just a small gold embossed seal. Malik picked it up cautiously. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a letter, neatly typed, addressed to Mr. Malik Weston. His eyes scanned the words, eyebrows lifting in surprise. "They want me to be on the National Youth Advisory Board for the Department of Transportation," he said aloud, blinking. "They saw the forum." "They did more than see it," Ezekiel replied. "They want you to help guide new policies, passenger treatment protocols, especially for minors and marginalized groups. They're creating a task force, and they want you on it." Malik's mouth opened, then closed. He didn't know what to say. "You don't have to say yes," Ezekiel added gently. "But if you do, I'll be behind you every step of the way." Malik stared at the letter for a long time. He thought about the slap, the silence, the speech, the standing ovation. He thought about all the kids who never got to speak at all. "I'll do it," he said, almost in a whisper. That same week, something else was happening behind the scenes, something Ezekiel hadn't told Malik about. After careful legal maneuvering and private investigations, Skybridge Airlines was preparing to announce one of its biggest changes yet, but it wouldn't come in the form of a press release. Ezekiel believed in actions, not announcements. So he created something bold, a real-time passenger advocacy system called Project Horizon. The idea was simple. Every flight would now have a two-person independent passenger relations team on board, trained in conflict resolution, equity, and emergency mediation. Not flight attendants, not crew, just trained advocates whose sole job was to observe and protect. Not just in case of violence, but in case of bias. It was controversial. Some insiders said it would slow down operations. Others said it was too political. Ezekiel didn't care. He rolled it out quietly, starting with a handful of long-haul flights, then expanding it each week. Meanwhile, Marjorie had taken her case public. A video surfaced, her sitting in a studio with a sympathetic talk show host, claiming she had been tricked, that Malik had acted aggressive, and that the footage had been edited. Ezekiel saw it on his phone during a late-night board meeting. His team stared at him, unsure of what he'd do. But he only chuckled. "Let her talk," he said. "The truth doesn't need to shout to be heard." Still, the pressure was building. The media wanted a public comment from Malik. Commentators debated his story on TV, dissecting his speech. Some accused him of playing the race card. Others demanded he be awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Amid it all, Malik stayed grounded, thanks largely to Amara. The two had grown closer. Not in a romantic way, at least not yet, but in that unspoken bond that forms when someone sees you, not for your fame or your pain, but for your whole self. They started working on a project together, an idea Amara had after the forum. A short documentary, created by students, for students, about racial profiling, everyday bias, and microaggressions. They called it You Wouldn't Know, because, as Malik explained in the opening scene, you wouldn't know what it's like unless it's happened to you. You wouldn't know how it feels to be feared just for walking, judged just for sitting, labeled just for being. But if you listen, we'll show you. The documentary featured interviews with teens from all over the country, some well-off, some struggling, all with stories. A boy in Arizona who was told he spoke too white. A girl in New York followed by store security every time she shopped. A non-binary teen in Texas who was thrown out of a public bathroom. Ezekiel watched an early cut and wiped tears from his eyes. "You're building more than a story," he told Malik that night. "You're building a mirror, and the world needs to look into it." But not everyone wanted to. Online backlash grew louder. Malik's social media was flooded with hate messages and threats. Some called him a liar. Others accused him of being a plant for political agendas. One evening, Ezekiel found Malik sitting quietly on the front porch, staring at the stars. "I didn't know telling the truth would make so many people angry," Malik said softly. "It always does," Ezekiel replied, taking a seat beside him. "People get angry when a mirror shows them what they don't want to see, but that doesn't mean you put the mirror down." They sat in silence for a while. Then Malik asked, "Do you think it'll ever change?" Ezekiel looked up at the sky, thinking of all he'd lived through, the insults in boardrooms, the rejections, the humiliation he'd swallowed just to get a seat at the table. "I think it already is," he said, "because of you." Just then, Ezekiel's phone buzzed. A message from Skybridge's security chief. He frowned, read it again, then looked at Malik. "What is it?" Malik asked. Ezekiel stood, phone still in hand, face unreadable. "You should come with me." "Where?" "To the airport." "Why?" "Because something happened on a flight this afternoon," Ezekiel said. "And you're going to want to see this." What they discovered at the airport would change everything, again. The terminal was quiet at that late hour, but Malik felt the tension the moment they arrived. Ezekiel walked with calm authority, nodding to the night supervisor and heading straight toward a private security room nestled behind Gate 22. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel and fresh wax on linoleum. As they entered the small room lined with screens and monitors, a woman in a blazer stood up. "Mr. Weston," she said, "we've isolated the footage." "Show it," Ezekiel said. Malik stood behind him, confused. "What's going on?" "Just watch," Ezekiel said, his eyes locked on the screen. The footage showed the inside of a flight from Miami to Houston earlier that day. A young boy, maybe 10 or 11, was sitting quietly near the window in row 14. His skin was dark brown, his backpack clutched tight on his lap. A flight attendant approached, blonde, mid-40s, expression stiff, and leaned in to speak to him. There was no sound, but you didn't need audio to feel the energy. She pointed to his seat, then to the back of the plane. The boy shook his head. She insisted. He reached into his bag and pulled out what looked like a boarding pass. She didn't take it. She waved it off. The boy gestured again, confused. Then she grabbed his arm and started pulling him from the seat. The boy resisted, not violently, just terrified. He tried to explain, pointing to the overhead bin where his coat was. She didn't care. She marched him down the aisle as passengers stared in silence. A couple stood, trying to ask questions. The attendant ignored them. A few rows back, one of the new passenger advocates Ezekiel had put on the flights stood and moved toward the front. The screen paused there. "That's Elijah," Ezekiel said, gesturing to the advocate. "Former school counselor. Calm under pressure." The security staffer pressed play again. Elijah approached, said something to the attendant, gently placed a hand on her shoulder. She snapped something back, too fast and too animated. Then he stepped between her and the boy, calmly pulling out his tablet and scanning the ticket the boy was still gripping. His face went pale. He looked up at the attendant, shook his head slowly, and then turned to help the boy back to his seat. The attendant stormed to the front of the plane. And then she hit the call button. The captain came out. Elijah explained. The captain pulled up something on his tablet. The attendant began yelling again. Then the screen cut out. Malik felt his heart twist. "Did she get fired?" he asked. "Not yet," the woman in the blazer said. "But she's grounded pending investigation. There's more. Turn it up." Another monitor played a cell phone video that had just surfaced online hours earlier. Same flight, same boy. But this time, the moment after the incident, passengers clapping. Elijah kneeling beside the boy, handing him juice. The boy's face was wet with tears, but he was smiling. The woman filming whispered, "Bless his heart. They tried to take him off for no reason. But that man, he saved him." The clip ended. Ezekiel turned to Malik. "You asked me if things were changing," he said. "That advocate, that's your idea, son. Project Horizon wouldn't exist if not for you. That boy got to stay in his seat because of what you lived through." Malik swallowed hard. The lump in his throat refused to move. "He's okay?" he asked. "Yes," the security chief said. "His name's Marcus. His mom's a nurse, was flying in from her shift, and couldn't be on the same plane. She's picking him up now." Ezekiel reached into his coat and handed Malik a different kind of folder. "This just came today," he said. "A proposal from the Department of Education." Malik opened it, reading slowly, then looked up in disbelief. "They want to fund a national school program," he said. "Based on your documentary," Ezekiel confirmed, "and the youth board work you're doing. They want You Wouldn't Know to be a cornerstone of bias awareness education." Malik stared at the paper, stunned. "How do you even process this?" he asked. "I was just a kid on a flight. I didn't ask for any of this." "No," Ezekiel said, "but you answered it. With dignity. With courage. And you didn't just speak up for yourself. You made space for others." Malik didn't reply. He didn't need to. The truth sat heavy in the air between them. Later that night, back at home, he found himself lying awake. He pulled out his phone and watched the clip of Marcus again. The scared boy. The silence. The rescue. It hit him all over again. It was bigger than him now. He got out of bed and walked into his father's study. Ezekiel was at the desk, reviewing reports. Malik stood in the doorway. "I want to start a foundation." Ezekiel looked up. "A foundation," he repeated. "Yeah," Malik said. "For kids like Marcus. For advocates like Elijah. For documentary projects. Legal help. Scholarships. Whatever it takes." Ezekiel slowly smiled. "What are you going to call it?" Malik paused, then walked over and opened his notebook. He flipped to a blank page, wrote one word in bold letters, and turned it around. "Reserve." "Because everyone deserves a place," Malik said. "A seat, a voice, a chance." Ezekiel reached over and shook his hand. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The story of Marcus hit national news. Activists began referencing the Malik standard for how young black travelers deserve to be treated. Airlines across the country called Skybridge to ask about Project Horizon. But even amid all the noise, Malik stayed focused. The foundation was real. The mission was clear. And yet, something else was brewing. Something unexpected. Something personal. Because the woman who had humiliated Malik on that flight all those months ago, she was about to come back into the picture in a way no one could have predicted. It was late in the evening when the phone rang. Malik had just finished a meeting at the new office for his foundation, and the team was wrapping up the final touches on their first community event. He answered without looking at the caller ID. "Hello," he said, his voice still hoarse from speaking to a crowd of young activists earlier that day. "Malik," a familiar voice said, almost timid. It was Deborah, the flight attendant who had slapped the boy, who had been the reason for everything. The reason for his documentary, the foundation, the newfound platform. Malik took a deep breath, steadying himself. He hadn't heard from her since that day, nor had he ever imagined she would contact him. "Yeah. What is it?" he replied, his tone guarded. I saw the video," she stammered, almost apologetic. "I saw what happened. I saw what you did for Marcus. I should have never done what I did on that plane. I was wrong, and I've been thinking about it ever since. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to apologize. Really, from the bottom of my heart." There was a long pause before Malik responded. He thought about her words, the fury in her eyes when she slapped the phone out of Jalen's hand, the way the passengers had gasped, the way the entire flight had shifted in that moment. His anger had been replaced with a sense of profound sadness. Her apology didn't undo the damage, but it did speak volumes about the way she was processing the consequences of her actions. "You know," Malik began slowly, "it wasn't just you that day. It wasn't just about the flight, or about Jalen. It was about a system, about all the little things people like you and me deal with every single day. People in positions like yours, they hold power. They have influence over others. And you used that power to hurt a kid." He paused for a moment. His voice softened. "But I hear you. I understand that you're sorry. I don't expect you to fix what happened, but I do hope you learned from it." Deborah's voice cracked with emotion. "I am learning. Every day. I've been taking courses, reading books, going to workshops on unconscious bias. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I swear to you, I'll do better. I promise." Malik's fingers tightened around the phone. He could feel the weight of the moment, the tension between the past and the future. What was it that made some people change? What made someone realize their faults and then commit to something better? Was it time? Or was it simply the courage to look themselves in the mirror? "I'm not asking for a magic fix," Malik said after a beat. "But you need to understand that the world doesn't stop for you to learn. Some kids don't get second chances. Some people never get to apologize. You've got a lot of work to do, and that's on you now. but I'm not going to pretend like everything's okay just because you said sorry." He could hear Deborah nodding through the phone, even though he hadn't given her much to work with. "I get it," she said. "I truly do. And thank you for not just slamming the door on me." Malik exhaled, the frustration inside him slowly ebbing away. "Take care, Deborah, and I hope you really do change. For everyone's sake." With that, the call ended. He sat in the office for a while, contemplating the unexpected exchange. He had never imagined that he'd be hearing from her, especially after everything that had transpired. But life had a way of throwing curveballs, didn't it? Later that evening, while scrolling through his email, Malik saw a new message come through. It was from the same security chief who had shared the footage of Marcus. He opened it, and the subject line made his heart stop. "Flight Attendant Deborah's termination. Next steps." The email outlined the company's decision. Deborah had been officially removed from her duties, pending further review. There were still legal processes underway, but the airline had made it clear that her actions were inexcusable. But there was another part of the email that caught Malik's eye. A note about Marcus. Apparently, the airline had offered him a full scholarship to attend one of the best private schools in the country, covering everything from tuition to board. It was an unexpected gesture, a symbol of the airline's commitment to ensuring that passengers like Marcus were treated with dignity. Malik leaned back in his chair, a sense of satisfaction welling up inside him. Marcus, the boy who had been wronged, would never be the same again. The email ended with a simple line: "We're committed to making this right." Malik closed his laptop, standing up and walking over to the window. The city lights flickered below, a reminder of how far he'd come. He thought about the millions of kids, adults, and families who still faced the same discrimination and systemic injustice. He thought about his foundation and the work that lay ahead. There was so much more to be done. But as he stood there, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Things were changing. And while the fight wasn't over, it was clear to him now more than ever. Every step forward, no matter how small, was a victory. As the night deepened, Malik's phone buzzed again. He glanced down at it, surprised to see a new notification. It was a message from the one person he least expected to hear from. It was Jalen. "Hey Malik," the message started. "I just wanted to thank you for everything. For being there for me when no one else would. I know my dad never really spoke about it, but that whole thing on the plane, it changed my life. I've been working with Project Horizon for the past few months now. You're right. I'm not going to waste this opportunity. I'm not going to be quiet anymore. Thank you for making me realize that. I hope one day I can do what you're doing. Keep fighting, and I'll keep fighting too." Malik smiled to himself as he read those words. That was the impact he had always dreamed of making. It wasn't just about righting one wrong. It wasn't just about standing up to injustice when it happened to him. It was about creating something bigger, a movement, a generation of people willing to fight for what was right. The future was brighter than ever. And this story wasn't over. It was just beginning.